Attention, you're listening to The Todd Huff Show, America's home for conservative, not bitter talk and education. Be advised, the content of this program has been documented to prevent and even cure liberalism, and listening may cause you to lean to the right. And now, coming to you from the Full Suite Wealth Studios, here is your conservative but not bitter host, Todd Huff.
Well, that is right, my friends. You have successfully and ever so wisely tuned in to America's home for conservative, not bitter talk. I hope you had a great weekend. We had a nice weekend here at the Huff household. It was hot here, but hey, I'm not going to complain about that in the slightest because I know what is to come, and I would pick summer and the heat any day. I know some of you out there are longing for fall. I think that's crazy, but anyway, I know what comes after fall, but it was a good weekend. Hope you had a nice weekend as well. I'd like to also take a moment here to welcome listeners to our program from the newest station that we have added to our lineup, and that would be KSHP in Las Vegas, Nevada. Appreciate you tuning in and welcome you to the program, and we'll tell you and everyone else out there that if you've missed anything, which of course if you're a new listener, you've missed 10 years of broadcast, you got a lot of catching up to do, but if you've missed anything, you can always go to the website, toddhuffshow.com, or you can listen to the podcast anywhere that you listen to podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, wherever. And I want to welcome you to the program, whether you've been with us from day number one or this is day number one for you. Welcome to the program. Got to give it a couple weeks to get the full feel and flavor of the program, my friends, but I welcome you and look forward to having you join the conservative, not bitter movement. Friends, you know one of the biggest challenges for conservatives like us is finding ways to ensure our values align with the things that we do, including how we invest our money. That's important. After all, I mean, we're investing money in companies. It's a bad thing if they're taking the revenues, the investments, and then doing things that we don't want to support politically. That happens. That's where DEI comes from. That's where the abortion agenda comes from. That's where the trans agenda comes from. And so that's why I like what the team at 48 Financial is doing. They specialize in what is known as biblically responsible investing. That means that they screen out companies that do not align with your faith and your values, so you're not funding things that go completely against what you believe in. They do the heavy lifting for you, helping align your investments with your purpose and goals. And the best part is you can take an assessment right now to see if your investments are aligned with your values, your current investments. There's no risk obligation, none of that. Just go to 48financial.com/Todd. That's 48financial.com/Todd. You can do an assessment there to where you can see after that assessment is kind of graded whether or not or to what degree those investments are in alignment with your values. 48 Financial, my friends, because your money should work for your values. Now, you know, on Friday, you've seen the videos. You may have watched part of the press conference. I didn't watch it. I listened to it. Did I watch it? I might have watched it too. I can't remember what I was doing, but I know it was on, but I might have only been able to listen primarily to the audio. So I listened to the press conference after Trump met with Putin. A couple things I want to talk about here. First, and I talked about this on today's Todd Talk, which you can also get on the website. But I want to say this. It is unbelievable to me. I mean, predictable, yes, but still, it's unbelievable, unfathomable to me as a guy who loves this country. You know that I grew up in the 1980s, which is clearly the best decade to grow up in. That's what it feels like anyway. But I grew up in the 80s when loving your country was kind of a cool thing. I think most people loved their country back in the 1980s. Reagan was in charge, and America was, killing it in a lot of ways. It was good to be patriotic. People were optimistic. I'm not saying everything was perfect, but it was a good, optimistic decade. And that's not the way that it is today for a lot of people. A lot of people find that the cool and hip thing is to hate this nation. In particular, not even to hate this nation, which of course they do. They also hate President Trump. And no matter what he does, they wish for him to fail, which is preposterous. As I said on the Todd Talk, I understand. I am cheering for conservatives, for limited government types, for people who want to restore common sense and constitutional values and a constitutional framework that, move this country back to the point where we are operating within that constitutional framework. I'm on the side of people who want to do those things. I'm on the side of people who love this country. I'm on the side of people who love free markets, free speech. Even if I'm not a fan of everything people say with their free speech, there's plenty of things out there with which I disagree. I may vehemently disagree, but I will absolutely stand shoulder to shoulder with folks who have the right to say the things with which I completely and utterly disagree. That is, I like politicians who are in that sort of place intellectually, and also from a perspective of what they want to get accomplished on their agenda. So. I understand. I understand having a side that I root for. When the left was in political power, I was cheering against their policies. I was arguing against them on this show. And you can go back just to a year ago when we were talking about all the disastrous things that have happened to this country because of the radical left. You would have heard me cheering against them. Not cheering, that's not the right word, cheering. I'm arguing, fighting against them, trying to stop the nonsense, trying to stop the things that were causing high inflation, trying to stop the things that were causing America to be truly disrespected and not feared around the world, trying to stop the things that were leading this country into the abyss when it comes to things like the trans agenda, the LGBTQIAA plus agenda, all this radical nonsense, men competing against women in women's sports, the abortion agenda. Do you know, by the way, side note, I referenced this last week. Do you know in the state of Indiana, which has now put in place restrictions on abortions, do you know in the past, I think it's the past year, it might have been in 2024, or it could be the past 12 months, one of the two, abortions in Indiana dropped after Roe v. Wade. So Roe v. Wade was overturned. Then you had the laws passed by legislatures that either put additional limits on abortion or they didn't, depending upon the state. They put more restrictions on abortions in Indiana. They didn't do a complete ban, but they did put more restrictions. Abortions in Indiana, my state, which that's where I'm from, by the way, if you're a new listener from Las Vegas or wherever, 98% drop in abortions in the state of Indiana. Now, you might say they just go to neighboring Illinois to get the abortions, and that certainly could be true. But to say that there's no impact on the protection of unborn children, on the protection of human life after some of these laws would be a vast, an incredibly deceitful and misleading comment, because there's absolutely a ton of positive things that have come from those things. So I'm out there arguing against those policies. I remember I've shared this before, back when Obama became president. He won the election in 2008. Rush Limbaugh, who I used to listen to, he was asked by somebody, the Washington Post, the New York Times, I don't remember, to write a 400-word editorial on his hopes for the Obama administration. And Rush said, I don't need 400 words, I need 4. And here's what they are. I hope he fails. I hope he fails. And of course, people lost their minds because Rush should have been embracing America's first black president. It's not about the race or ethnicity or the gender. It was about the ideas. It always has been. It always will be. It always should be, at least when you go to that voting booth. It's not good to choose not to vote for someone because they're a certain race. It's also not good to vote for someone just because they're of a certain race. This is craziness, especially when ideas are implemented, policies are set by administration, and they can be by administrations, and they can be dramatically different from administration to administration, right? I mean, look at what Trump's doing that is different from Biden. Look at how the border is secure. Shockingly, the border is secure, practically secure. Deportations are different. You know, in the past, they counted deportations as people that they stopped, the ones that they actually stopped coming across the border, and then when they sent them back, they would count those as deportations. But those weren't really deportations. Those were actually stopping people who were trying to start the process of entering into this country. Not the same as someone who's been here illegally for some period of time, who'd already skated past the defenses and the system, and then you take them and say, you're not supposed to be here. You've got to go back to where you came from, to your home country sort of thing. Anyway, so these policies matter tremendously, and I'm against the policies. I'm against those policies of the radical left. Almost 100. I don't want to say 100% because there might be something that I think, hey, didn't think about that. But by and large, generally speaking, I'm diametrically opposed to the radical left because I reject their worldview. I reject their ideology. I reject their framing of how society needs to function, the role of government. I actually pay attention to history and understand that governments that seek to do things on behalf of people, taking away their freedoms and choices, do a tremendous amount of harm to the individual, to society, often leading directly to the killing and the imprisonment of their own citizens. You don't have to look very far into the history books to see examples of this with gulags in the Soviet Union. I mean, go look at Mao's China. This is not complicated to see. This is what happens. They say one thing and they do another. It is remarkable to watch this happen time and time and time again, but people are so almost hypnotized by the words coming from the mouths of these radically insane dictators and radically extreme leftists that they will vote for these things because it sounds better, but in reality, it's worse. It's infinitely worse, tremendously worse. And so that's why I'm against the ideas of the radical left. And I've got no problems in theory. I mean, they can be for or against whatever they want. For the Democrat Party to be against, for the pundits out there to be against what Trump is doing, fine, make your case. Let's argue this out in the public square. Let's have at it. But there's something that happens with the left, and this is not because of their hatred for Trump, but maybe a little bit. They are blinded by their hatred, not just of Trump. Keep in mind, they hate Trump because they've made that the acceptable thing to do within their circles, but they hate conservatives. They hate people who love limited government and love maximizing individual liberty. They don't like people who are not statists. They don't like people who get in the way of them accumulating power. They, the left, the bureaucrats, they don't like that. They don't like people who say that's enough power, that's enough money, that's the limit of what the government should be doing. They don't like that. They don't like any of us who say those things. They think that we stand in the way of progress when, of course, they are leading us down a regressive path. They're not progressives at all, unless you want to say they're progressing us toward destruction. And then, of course, I would say that's absolutely what they are. But in spite of all that, when it comes to the water's edge, it used to be said that politics stopped at the water's edge. And what do we mean by that? It used to mean that we could fight about things domestically, ideas, tax policies, this, that, and the other. But when it came to something that involved America and the rest of the world, right? It's an international issue or something that doesn't necessarily impact what happens directly within the border of this nation. Instead, it happens somewhere out there, right? Somewhere it could be something that directly impacts this nation as a whole, red states, blue states, all of us. We used to say that politics stops at the water's edge. I even remember hearing that as a young man. I haven't heard that in a long time because that is something that a lot of people don't believe anymore. In fact, it's been there for anybody who wants to see it when we look at how the Trump and Putin meeting went down and how the left is cheering, candidly, openly cheering against Trump. They want a political loss for Trump in this summit, the meeting, whatever. There's going to be possibly a series of these meetings to try to find an end to this war between Ukraine and Russia. And these same people who are flying the Ukrainian flags at their home or putting stickers of them on their car, putting graphics of them on their social media profiles, I stand with Ukraine or whatever else, they're rooting against President Trump negotiating, being involved with somehow bringing this conflict to an end. What is wrong with these people? What is wrong with these people? You realize what has to be wrong with you to where you've been wanting there to be a certain outcome? You want to see Ukraine to not be facing military force from Russia. You want to see the end of that war. But then the president changes. Of course, the war started when your guy was in charge. Did you hear Putin, by the way? Putin said that it would not have happened. The left, this has to drive the Democrats crazy. Putin said this would not have happened if Trump was in the White House. There wouldn't be a war today. In fact, I actually heard someone say the translator didn't translate it as directly as possible, because I believe the correct translation, if what I'm reading and hearing is correct, is that Putin said there's no way that this would have happened. This absolutely would not have happened. And when the translator translated it in real time, it seemed a little bit more qualified, but still the statement was made that this war probably wouldn't have been happening if Trump was in the White House when the war started. Anyway, for whatever you think about that, I'm still, for these people who have been telling us how important it is for this war to stop, and it would be good for a war to stop, right? I mean, what is good about these wars? I mean, war is bringing death and just a lot of loss for people in the country. It's damaging their country physically, their infrastructure. It's taking away fathers and husbands, and it's not a good thing. And so it would be good to bring about an end to this war. But the left is now cheering against the president and rooting against him, hoping he doesn't succeed because politics. And friends, this is the ugly truth. One of the ugly truths about what it means to be a radical leftist today. I've said this before. I will say it again. I've had Democrats, liberals, who have told me that I am absolutely right in my assessment here. To the radical left. Hear me say this. Now, I don't mean every single Democrat, but I mean everyone who's a radical leftist. And what do I mean by that? I mean by these people who fundamentally hate America. I was raised, by the way, in a Union Democrat home. I was not raised to hate America. I was raised to love this country. Actually, my dad, who's a Union Democrat, is a conservative in many, many ways, but he was a Democrat because of the Union and his concerns and fears that Republicans in charge would weaken the working class, the middle class, whatever you want to call it, the folks who were not part of the business side of economics in the country, to hurt the labor force. And so because of that one issue, my dad became a Democrat. And it was important to him, and I understand that. But I will say this, even Democrats from the 1980s and 90s are nothing like these extreme radical leftists today. So I'm not talking about average rank-and-file Democrats. I'm talking about Democrats who hate this country as founded, who think that we need a new Bill of Rights, who think that we need to institute things like reparations, who think that it's totally acceptable cool and very scientific for boys to play against girls in girls' sports and all that sort of stuff. I'm talking about the radical left who actually doesn't believe, the godless radical left. They don't believe in a God. To them, government is God. This is their religion. This is everything to them. There is no life after death, they say. The only life we have is the life here. And so we had better make it as good as we possibly can. And they say the way to do that is to put people who are, radical leftists in charge, people that are going to make decisions on our behalf. This runs totally contradictory to the way that we were created and the way that we were created to live in this republic. But this is how they've established themselves today. They hate this nation. Their government is God, religion, whatever you want to call it. I've shared before, just imagine if you do go to church, it would be like to have Trump in the White House to the left, to the unhinged, radically left, godless radical left. It would be like at church having a new pastor. We're looking for a new pastor, or soon will be. We've got an interim. But it would be like the new pastor that we get being an atheist. Like, that doesn't make sense, right? You can't even, this is someone who's not even there to proclaim the gospel and teach the truth of the scriptures. They are at odds, are at war with God and the Bible. Why would we put that person in charge of our church? That's how the left thinks about Trump. It's a form of blasphemy in their distorted worldview to have Trump in the White House, to have some of these policies instituted, because he stands against a lot of the things that the bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. have been trying to build and to establish for decades now. And they hate him and are blinded so much by him, by the party that allowed him to have political power, that they can't even find a way to root for him when he is trying to bring an end to this war in Ukraine. I've got sound bites. Marco Rubio was on Face the Nation. I believe that's what it was. CBS over the weekend. I've got some sound bites. I want to talk about that. Before I do that, friends, let me remind you that we here at the Todd Huff Show started a new division of the business here. It's called Red, White, and Brand. Red, White, and Brand helps businesses put their logos on almost anything. That can be T-shirts and hats, other apparel. That can be trade show booths, banners. That can be promotional products, premium products, your logo on virtually anything. Red, White, and Brand is here to help you. And if you go to the website, redwhiteandbrand.com, use promo code Todd, you will save 10% on your order. And if you place that order online, you will also receive free shipping. So, redwhiteandbrand.com, promo code Todd. Quick timeout for me, my friends. Back here in just a minute. Welcome back, my friends. So, I had mentioned before the break, we know that the left is rooting against President Trump to negotiate an end to this war between Russia and Ukraine. Really quickly, though, I just want a couple of visual takeaways. You saw Trump, some pretty amazing visuals that happened during this meeting. Trump and Putin, of course, meeting in Alaska. First, when Putin gets there, I read that Putin rode in Trump's vehicle. That was something that happened in the Beast, even though he had his own. But when they get there, Trump has F-22 Raptors, maybe some F-35s too. I just remember seeing Raptors, but those are the F-35, the F-22 Raptor and the F-35 Lightning. That's the Joint Strike Fighter, the JSF. But these are some of the most technologically advanced military aircraft in the world. My son and I and my brother, about a month ago now, went to the Oshkosh Air Show in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, and among many things, we saw a demonstration of the F-22. I had seen it before. This is my favorite. I love aircraft, military aircraft in particular, but this aircraft's incredible. This is something that terrifies. When I say terrifies, it's bigger than that. This aircraft is so dominant. When they do exercises, there's been stories of the F-22 defeating an entire, I don't know what you call maybe not a squadron, but, multiple jets that are engaged in these exercises. The other jets don't even know that they're in the vicinity. These things are impossible to find. They can engage when you don't even know that they're in the area, and they're incredibly dominant. If these aircraft are in the sky, you will have air superiority. You will have control of the skies. These are incredible aircraft that can do astonishing things. The things that they show at the air show, which, again, are probably not the full capabilities of these machines, is absolutely astonishing. I've seen them do things that seem to defy physics. I remember watching it go vertical, and I've watched it kind of pause in the sky. It doesn't have a lift fan or anything like that, like the F-35 does, but it would kind of drift downward and backwards and then drops it's an incredible aircraft. Absolutely astonishing. Trump has Putin, as they're walking to sit down and talk, he's walking past a whole bunch of these things. Then you look to the sky, and you see the B-2 stealth bomber flyover, which looks like Batman's signal, with a couple of F-22s on both sides on an escort. I've seen some other pictures that people in Anchorage had captured videos of this as well. It's an awesome sight. And it was, both intended to be kind of a ceremonial thing, but it was also, make no mistake about it, a reminder that we've got some stuff that you all need to be aware of. And that's what we're willing to show you. I mean, you think that the technology that flew overhead or that was parked there on the as they were approaching the meeting site, that's what we know about. That's what we're willing to tell people about. What else does this country have in the form of military defense that other nations are absolutely terrified of? So that stuff was happening. You probably saw Putin look up kind of in awe as the F-22s and B-2 flew over and all of that. I think Trump may have glanced up, but then he didn't really look up again, a position of kind of a power move. Anyway, you got all that stuff, people talking about, what all these things mean and criticizing the outcome of the meeting. Listen, we're in the early stages of this. I don't know where this is going to go. Putin is not to be trusted, but that doesn't mean that you can't find a way to work with him. And that leads me to what I want to talk about next. Marco Rubio was on with Margaret Brennan, and I've got a soundbite from this that I'm going to play here in a moment. Before I do that, my friends, let's be honest. When your financial world starts getting a little more complicated, you need more than just a one-size-fits-all approach. You need more than just financial advisors and people who are investing in 401ks and Roths and that sort of thing. You need a team of people that extend beyond just, and I'm not putting down financial advice, but there's a point when your total portfolio and your entire level of wealth requires that you look to another level of support. That's where Full Suite Wealth shines. Their team specializes in working with families and individuals at your level, offering personalized guidance that goes far beyond the basics, from private equity and private credit to options strategies and coordinated legal planning. Full Suite Wealth helps you see the big picture and make confident decisions about your legacy. We're talking no longer just about building wealth. You're talking about leaving a legacy. It's all about having a dedicated team guide you every step so that you can focus on what matters to you, your family, your goals, your future. Want real confidence in your financial life? Visit FullSuiteWealth.com. That's FullSuiteWealth.com. Build your legacy, secure your future. All right, so Marco Rubio sits down with Margaret Brennan on, what is that? That's I think I said Face the Nation earlier. I believe it's Face the Nation. And so what's the point of this, right? We all know, let's just state the obvious here. We've got Trump sitting down with Putin in hopes of negotiating an end to the war between Russia and Ukraine. Trump has already negotiated other peace deals. Now, he's wanting to do another one. He made this clear on his campaign trail that this was a priority. And so that's what he's trying to do here. So he's sitting down with Putin. There's probably going to be subsequent meetings, maybe even very soon. And he's basically, well, the administration, Rubio, I'm going to play the soundbite in a moment, is saying, look, anytime that you have to sit down and have a meeting like this, there's going to have to be concessions from both sides. And Marco Rubio makes a really good point. I think it's in this particular clip. He says that if you don't want to have to make any concessions, that's a surrender. This is a negotiated settlement. And now, this is where this upsets people on both sides. Well, people on both political sides, really, because you think, hey, if some aggressor comes in, takes over part of your country, and then they say, we'll negotiate an end, is it acceptable to say, well, you got to keep the land that you took over? And so the reality is the only way to secure that land is probably back through military might and force. Maybe you can get some of it. Who knows what can be negotiated? Maybe they use that as a leverage point. I'm just trying to give the facts here forget about who this is about, what you desire the outcome to be, what you think is fair, just in general. Just take away names of countries and just say if that's the scenario, then you either try to defeat them militarily, which no one's prepared to do. No one's really saying we have to do this. If the United States said we're going to send in troops, then perhaps that would be, I'm not saying that we should do that by any stretch of the imagination. I think that would be an absolutely ridiculous thing to do. But I'm saying that then in order to get everything you want, you have to basically do it militarily and then cause the other side to have to surrender. So that's what Marco Rubio is out here saying. Look, we're trying to have a negotiated settlement, which means both sides have to make concessions. If one side doesn't make a concession, doesn't have to make a concession, then what you have is a surrender. And the only way you can have that is through a military victory, and that's not going to happen. We're actually trying to prevent that from happening. That's kind of, in part, the point here. So I want you to listen to this conversation, Marco Rubio and Margaret Brennan on CBS's Face the Nation.
Ultimately, if Vladimir Putin is going to be offered land that he has not seized yet, but negotiates his way into, doesn't this set a dangerous precedent that the United States now accepts this concept that it is okay to seize land by force?
Well, Putin's already seized land by force, and that in and of itself is not a positive precedent. This whole war
Are you
is
demanding a withdrawal?
Precedent. Well, again, in order to have a deal here to reach the end of this conflict, both sides are going to have to make concessions. That's just a fact.
Does that mean
in any negotiation,
where Russian forces are?
But this is not about acceptance. This is about what Ukraine can accept and what Russia can accept. They both have to accept it. Otherwise, there won't be a peace deal. Okay? If there aren't concessions, if one side gets everything they want, that's called surrender. That's called the end of the war through surrender. And that's not what we're close to doing because neither side here is on the verge of surrender or anything close to it. So in order for there to be a peace deal, this is just a fact. We may not like it. It may not be pleasant. It may be distasteful. But in order for there to be an end of the war, there are things Russia wants that it cannot get, and there are things Ukraine wants that it's not going to get. Both sides are going to have to give up something in order to get to the table, in order to make this happen. That's just the way it is. And I mean, the sooner we accept that, that's the reality. Now, what those things are is going to be up to both sides. There's no conditions that can be imposed on Ukraine. They're going to have to accept things, but they're going to have to get things too. And so...
All right, I have to take a break. Just run out of time in this segment. So, quick time out, my friends. Back here in just a minute. Welcome back, my friends. Third and final segment of today's program. Before we wrap things up this hour, this segment, I should say, and before we talk a little bit more about Marco Rubio's comments there about concessions and surrender and all that, let me remind you, this program brought to you in part by our friends at Solti. Solti is an all-natural dietary supplement that has been clinically proven, scientifically proven to lower cholesterol. So if you have high cholesterol, if you have a family history of high cholesterol or heart problems, consider taking Solti. It is natural. Science has spoken on this. It's lowered the cholesterol of many folks, and it may be able to do the same for you. I take Salty. All you have to do is take 2 Salty soft gels a day. It's very manageable. They're not big. It's easy to do. It's not an expensive thing to do. It's a very good place to start. It's a great first place to start to take care of your heart's health, and that's an important thing to keep in mind as you age. So, Soltea.com is the website, S-O-L-T-E-A, Soltea.com, S-O-L-T-E-A.com. Promo code Todd is going to get you, now listen to this, 50% off your first supply, which is a 3-month supply, and it'll get you free shipping. So it's a great deal. It's very affordable. It's not an expensive product to begin with, and it's incredibly affordable with the discount promo code Todd. So you have nothing to lose but high cholesterol numbers. It's safe, by the way, my friends. Soltea.com, promo code Todd. All right, so let's go back to Rubio's comments, his discussion with Margaret Brennan. So Margaret Brennan says, look, if Russia, they've already taken over parts of Ukraine, what if they use this as leverage to even get more land? Is that acceptable? Is this something that the United States is really wanting to kind of set up as an example of things that we would allow, that would be acceptable? And Marco says, look, you have to remember that both sides are going to have to give up things that they want in order to get things that they want. This is a negotiation. This is not a surrender, and that's important. That's very important to understand, a surrender. A surrender is different from what we're having here. A surrender is what happened when the United States beat the Imperial Japanese in World War II. They refused to surrender. It's why we ultimately dropped 2 atomic bombs on their cities, on Hiroshima and on Nagasaki. It was this time of year, August of 1945. And eventually that, by doing that, by dropping those weapons, but dropping those bombs on their cities, it forced Japan to the table. The reason we did it was that we did the estimates, our military did the estimates, and thought that, there were going to be it was going to be a very, very heavy loss to go back and to physically take over all of the islands of Japan and the remaining islands that the Japanese had taken over and occupied at the time. We realized, hey, this is going to be serious losses for us. We actually would be saving American lives if we use these weapons. And so they refused to surrender, even though they're the ones that started the war. But we forced them to surrender. When we forced them to surrender, we told them, these are the rules. This is what's up. We're not asking for your permission. This is what's going to happen. This is how this is going to be. Now, they sat down and had a meeting, and if the Allies decided, okay, this is acceptable, then fine. But there's no negotiation. We don't have to give and take at all because we won this war. It's over. We beat you back into submission. That's not the case here in Russia, Ukraine. Now, if you listen to this program for any length of time, you know that I'm critical of these pieces of paper that I say. I remember talking about the piece of paper that Bill Clinton signed in the 1990s where the North Koreans promised. In fact, I said they pinky promise. They sign a sheet of paper, they make a pinky promise to the president at the time, Bill Clinton, to not have nuclear weapons, and lo and behold, they have nuclear weapons, or they did until Trump annihilated their facilities here recently. But anyway, that is something else that we have to keep in mind. Marco Rubio had some words about that too. I just don't have time to play it. Basically, what he said was, there's 2 parts of this. There's 3 parts of this. There's the negotiation, the agreement. Can we find the framework, number 1? Do we have a way to verify, right? Whatever's agreed upon, is there a way to verify that those things are being done? And then the third part is enforcement of the agreement. The third part is, hey, if we're going to have an agreement that both sides say, hey, the war will stop if this happens. Whatever that looks like. If it's acceptable for all parties and they can sign that paper and there's a way to verify it to say, okay, these things are in fact being done. But then there's an enforcement measure, which means what happens if they're not being done. And this is where I'm very skeptical of these settlements, because typically there's either not a strong enforcement measure, or you have people who have political power who are not willing to utilize the enforcement measure when it's time. Now, this is where this stuff gets dangerous, because I don't want to see the United States involved in any conflict. So who knows what this will look like specifically. But if you don't have a way to measure and to verify, and you don't have a way to enforce, then we're just playing games here. So that's why these things take so long. That's why they're so complicated, on top of both sides having to decide what concessions they are willing to live with. So there you go. I've got to go, friends. Have a great day, SDG.